to Theosophy and also to the notion of authorial concealment. Today, Samanta will talk about the sad story of the artist who wanted to forge new theosophical art. So, Samanta, the word is yours.
Thank you so much. I think you all can see my presentation.
Yeah, we can see it.
Good. Okay, so this is a story of ambitions, of delusions, and also of groundbreaking art. I will let you the final judgment if the story is really sad or not, but surely I have to precise a little bit the adjective new in my title, because it presumed that there will be an old theosophical art. So my presentation is divided in three parts. First, I'm going to investigate which is the situation of theosophy and art at this moment in which Mondrian lived. And then I'm going to analyze a little bit the artistic theory of Mondrian, and then Mondrian's list of failures in the attempt of creating theosophical art, a new theosophical art. The situation is symbolist. The connection between theosophists and artists, or theosophy and artists, is mainly in the artistic field of symbolism. Here, just an example. For example, Jean Delville, French painter, who produced Two Souls. These paintings it can be defined as symbolist because it represents woman and women, two opposites that came together in light. Of course, I'm not here to analyze the painting, but just to let you know that the environment, the artistic environment of Theosophy was mainly symbolist. Also, the journals, theosophical journals, were focused on artists. For example, we have here an article from the Theosophists who mention actually Jean Delville as theosophist, painter, and even poet. Journals were actually the first means through which the idea about art were spread in the theosophical environment. And surely the first feature that we can identify is this connection between art and life. At the beginning of last century, we witness an increase of artists' interest in theosophy, and in the theosophical environment, we assist an increase of articles related to art and what is a theosophical viewpoint on art. For example, here we have an article from the Universal Brotherhood Path by Mackell, who was an artist, English artist, belonging to the community of Point Loma. He met actually Blavatsky, and in his diaries, he explained that he recognized in her the wise woman with a message for the world. So he became her pupil, artist pupil. So Mackell expressed this idea that art plays a part in life. But for the most of people, this part is really small because it is perceived as an accessory or ornamental. And this perception of art is also shared by other theosophical currents. For example, Agni Yoga and Steiner, Anthroposophy. During a conference, Steiner actually said that art shouldn't be a luxury. So this is the environment in which the art and theosophy met. As the art historian Baudin explained, artists were concerned with liberating art from physical reality. And also because of the new scientific discovery and the interest of theosophists in science, arts go through this big change in which artists and theosophists try to grasp a new reality, try to find what is behind what we can perceive with our senses. And actually in some journals, there are also critics against the realist painter who just depict what they saw. The other element, the other feature, is the universalism. Always Maquel wrote this amazing sentence about art, saying that it is not at all essential that art should be national. Art is something universal. This sentence shows exactly the idea of the scope of art according to a theosophical standpoint. And this idea of universal art is also linked to the universal purpose of the Theosophical Societies. So now, after this introduction about the situation and the connection between art and theosophy, we jump into the artistic theory of Mondrian, who someone maybe know that is called neoplasticism. So we have this artist who was born in the Netherlands and is starting painting figurative painting. So we have flowers, we have trees, and then something happened because we see and we remember him for composition in red, yellow, and blue, and his new style. So something happened actually in his life. In his 30s, he had some spiritual crisis, and this personal crisis led him to get in touch to some theosophical ideas. And actually in 1909, he joined officially the Theosophical Societies. Here you can see an example of his drawings before and his attempt to grasp what is behind reality after he joined the Theosophical Society. In 1918, we have the first manifest of this, the style, his new neoplasticism. And he talks about the old, which is connected with the individual, and the new, which is connected with the universal. So he tried to destroy this idea of the artist, really romantic idea, I would say, romantic idea of artist, which is a genius, which possess some specific ability to create art. The new is connected with the universal, and the new art is connected with a new consciousness, and the art is a balance between the universal and the individual. Of course, there are some problems in realizing this new art, and he identified these difficulties in the traditions, dogmas. He actually mentioned clearly institutions such as families, nations, church also are institutions that are opposed to the realization of this universality. In the point number 7, he even talked about war against the domination of individual despotism. Some years later, he published another article about the principles of neoplasticism. There are 6 principles, I just mentioned 3. The first principle is quite practical. It just mentioned that if you wanna do this kind of painting, you must use rectangular plane, primary color, or non-color. But the most interesting part is the following. He talks about equilibrium, proportion, a vital rhythm. How to create this vital rhythm? He suggests to not use naturalistic repetition and symmetry. If we have a composition and we use symmetry, of course, it will be in equilibrium, it will be balanced, but there is no rhythm because symmetry is something more static. And the connection between art and life, he tried to embody it with all his life, this principle. He created in his studio in Paris an artworks, a true artworks. And to show you better this his studio, I brought this picture from the an exhibition in Liverpool where the curators work to recreate his studio. As you can see, there are not only canvas and pictures on the wall, because he was actually living inside a painting. And always the art historian Baudin underlined that the message of these forms is the spiritual world of perfect cosmic harmony. So Mondrian also believed that this harmony could be bring into life through art. And now let's see the list of his failures in creating a new theosophical art. That are not totally his fault, because yes, Mondrian not always write in a clear way. Sometimes the sentences were a little bit complicated. So, but the environment in which he lived was the first challenge that he had to face. And the first we can call failure in his attempt to create this neoplastic art is an article about art that he wrote that was rejected because considered excessively revolutionary for the group of Theosophist artists, who, I must underline, the majority of artists, as I explained before, were symbolists. Then in 1917, the article Neoplastic Painting came out. He presented his article at the Theosophical Society meetings, and it was criticized even by his friends. The last failure happened in 1921, when he sent a copy of his book, The Neoplasticism, to Steiner with a kind remark saying, please, I wonder if you could find the time to read my brochure, Le Neoplasticisme. And Mondrian clearly stated that he believed the neoplasticism was the art, the true theosophical and anthroposophical art. And Steiner never replied his letter. So Mondrian was in Paris at the time, and in 1938 moved to London. Then also the war came, so he moved to America. And he spent his last 4 years listening to jazz and tried to combine his style, this style of music that Mondrian really liked, and this painting. We can see here that this painting, one of the most famous of his paintings, is inspired by the Boogie Woogie. And you can see that the color, the primary color, are still there. The square are still there. The connection among arts, painting, and music is still there. So what I can conclude from this presentation, which expressed just one little phase, one little side of my research, which is actually not finished. But what we can understand from this comparison, we have from one side the Theosophy and the Theosophical Society. And we know that the Theosophy and the Theosophists are two different things. Also, Blavatsky stated that the Theosophical Society was an imperfect realization of Theosophy. And Mondrian learned this difference really soon because he deeply believed in Theosophy, but his fellow Theosophists were not so much agree on his artistic theory. On the other side, we have the artistic milieu of the 20th century, in which there are some ideas, for example, the connection among arts. This is something that, for example, in the Bauhaus school is already there. And Mondrian is exactly in the middle of these two fields. So we have the tendency of a new realism. Mondrian wanted to grasp what is behind the reality, wanted to bring the harmony in life. So we have also the connection between art and life, also represented by his own studio in Paris, which is an artworks. And finally, we have this tendency to universalism. Art is something universal, which has no boundaries. Art also is something that can connect people and can help to create a connection among different peoples. So Mondrian was exactly in the middle. And probably if Mondrian was more accepted in the Theosophical Society as the founder of a true theosophical art, probably we will not know him a lot in the artistic milieu. He tried to find a kind of equilibrium among these two fields, the artistic milieu and the Theosophical Society in which he belongs, and Theosophy in which he was deeply convinced in the doctrine of Theosophy. So, which is the point, the final point, and also my proposal? Studying Theosophy in the Theosophical Societies helps us to have some tools to better understand the artistic milieu of the 20th century. And this tool can actually help us to reinterpret from another perspective the artworks, for example, also Kandinsky. So this is the conclusion. I hope to have sparked some ideas or some inspiration. And maybe in future, I will have some more concrete knowledge on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samantha, for this very interesting talk on the connection between art and theosophy in the first half of the 20th century. And I think there is definitely a lot of food for thought here, considering that we have such a famous artist as Mondrian, and that he really considered himself to be a philosophical artist and promoting philosophical art through living. But actually he received a kind of a difficult reaction from the philosophical milieu at the time, even though he had a different picture of himself. So the floor is now open for questions for Samantha. So please raise your hand or write in the comment field if you have something, comments or questions. So yeah, we have a question from Janet. Please go ahead, Janet.
Thank you. That was a really interesting paper. Thank you very much. I just wondered whether you knew or had researched yet which theosophists rejected his work, because many of those connected with De Stijl, in particular, were theosophists, including Theo van Doesburg, who was the leader of De Stijl. So I'd like to ask a supplementary about the futurists too, because I see that you're connected with the University of Turin, and many of them were also theosophists. So have you looked at which theosophists were rejecting this new form of art?
Well, consider that my perspective is trying to grasp that these kind of artists were seen from two different environments. The artistic environment, who watch actually this new this new inspired art from Theosophy, which inspiring doctrine. And yes, of course, Theo van Doesburg and Kandinsky, many artists were actually inside the theosophical environment, even if not all belongs to the theosophical environment. So I surely can find the name of his friends I have in the paper. I didn't mention here to not add too much details, but surely I will write the name of the artist in the chat, because there is this comparison. Theosophists, the interest of theosophists in art was quite late. I mean, also in the papers and theosophical journals, many articles about arts appeared at the beginning of the last century. But the 20 years before, there are other priorities. So with Point Loma, surely there is a big inspiration to bring art into the topic, into the field of theosophy. But I will write the name in the chat.
Okay, because I'm particularly interested in who was rejecting this art, because I mean I'm aware that there were various art magazines in various countries. There was one certainly in the UK. There was Orpheus, the magazine of the Theosophical Art Circle, but there would have been others, and I would have thought, particularly in Holland, where there are also some theosophical architects like de Basel, for example. And also, I can't remember, it's because I know that the Kunstmuseum in The Hague is actually it's a building of De Stil, because you probably know it. So I'm surprised that there was a rejection amongst theosophists, and I think that's interesting. And it's surprising too that they were obviously still continuing along a symbolist line from what you're arguing, because of course there was Malevich as well in Russia, who was a theosophist and who was also a modernist. Anyway, enough of that. Maybe we can speak on email.
Yeah, I will be glad to continue on this topic. Maybe I will write my email in the chat. So
Great, thank you. Thanks.
Oh, there are some other chat.
Yeah, so thanks for your question, comment, Janet, and then Samantha for your answers. So I think we have a few other questions and comments in the let's see, in the comment field. So there's one about, I saw one about whether theosophists also reject generally modernism. Yeah. So if Faye says, can we say that theosophists also reject modernism in general?
In general, it's too much. I mean, if we think that the first theosophist artists were symbolists, the symbolism became a kind of normality. Also from Point Loma, there are a lot of articles on symbolism, and the symbolism applied to life, how we can interpret symbolism. And so if you can imagine, after 20 years, 30 years from the creation of the Theosophical Society, there are these guys, this painter, who came out with square and rectangular and color, primary color, and they claim this is the true theosophical art. It was kind of groundbreaking. So in my opinion, the theosophical idea links to art were first led by artists, were inspired by theosophy, and then there is this encounters and these meetings between the artist and theosophists.
Thank you, Samantha. We have a few more comments, and then let's see, we have one from Paulina. And I think the first one from Paulina was also an appreciation. So Samantha, you can go back and take a look at some of those. Yeah. We have this one. A lot of artists were, as you say, inspired by theosophy, as well as specific various philosophical figures. This was further explored in G.R.S. Mead's The Quest Society, a post-philosophical organization formed around the 1910s. Many of its members were artists. Check out, if you haven't, The Quest, which is the journal, quarterly review, if you're interested in this. So that was a very useful comment, I think, to explore further. And we have from Mriganka here, have you come across any Indian artists who were in correspondence with Mondrian? So that's also a good question.
This is a good question. It's a good topic to investigate, and work in progress. This is a work in progress. So I surely will look for that.
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting to explore those cross-cultural dimensions at this time. So from George here, it seems to me that many philosophers need the artworks to express one of the teachings from the secret doctrine, and they would struggle to accept art that didn't do this in a direct way. Does Mondrian express the spiritual rather than theosophy? So there's a distinction there, maybe.
Okay, yeah. Well, Mondrian clearly stated that his art is the true theosophical and anthroposophical art. So he stated that. Of course, he was inspired also by his current, his environment, his artistic environment. So there this connection, also not only with Theosophy, but with other groups. But the idea, for example, of absolute that Mondrian had, that express, it's quite connected. It's quite well connected with Theosophy. Of course, the symbolism had the purpose to represent, to have a direct connection with sacred doctrine and Blavatsky. What, for example, Mondrian and other artists trying to do is put into practice what the theory, the doctrine of Theosophy claimed. So maybe this is also another point of clash between the artist and the Theosophist, because many artworks produced, for example, in Point Loma, were inspired by, of course, Theosophy, but all the articles are a lot of theory and philosophical arguments. Instead, in a group of artists, for example, Kandinsky or Mondrian, they actually tried to put into practice. Of course, the practice is always different from the theory and creates some problems.
Thank you very much for that. So we have two final questions and comments, one here from Joyce and then Janet. But in the comment field it says from Joyce, it sounds to me that when he names his own work true philosophical art, he's also sort of rejecting the other art that intends to have a philosophical meaning.
A kind of, I mean, not completely rejecting, because of course he studied all the ancient artworks, but he was against the theory. He wanted to put the theosophical theory, the theosophical doctrine in practice. This was his first aim. Art should be in life. So what he did, he created his own studio, has an artworks to demonstrate that art impact life, and the connection also with theosophical teaching, the color, the harmony, the equilibrium, the cycle, the idea of cycle and rhythm, vital rhythm. So while others were just talking, he tried to put them in practice. So it was kind of, maybe he tried a kind of revolution. I could say that he tried.
Thank you very much. So we have the final question or comment from Janet Lee.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you again, because listening to your answers to questions, I think you're actually onto something really very interesting here, which is to some extent the contrast between this old art and this new art. And it strikes me that you've talked about Point Loma, and that was a kind of utopia in a sense. And it's a different kind of utopia from the one that Mondrian and his friends were talking about. And I hadn't quite clocked up the split between Mondrian and his distile colleagues, but I think that's also interesting. And I think that this whole thing about what you've raised here about how Theosophists looked at this, and also how art was generally viewed, is a really very interesting one. So I just want to thank you for flagging this up.
Thank you so much.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. Let's all thank Samanta. So please give her a warm hand or reaction on Zoom here.